are ready to go ahead and get started. We've got a great crowd here. Welcome everybody. Glad everybody could come in and spend a few minutes with us this afternoon. For those of you that have never been on one of these sessions before, my name is Mark Stoddard. I run sales and marketing here at ClientSuccess, and so I'll be kind of our color commentary for the session today. And really excited to have Christine from Wisr as our guest today. Christine, hey, can you hear me? Can you see me? Looks like your video's there.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great. Really pumped, really excited. How's everything in Northeast Ohio today?
We are doing well. Finally, some relief from the heat.
Finally, some relief. Yeah, that's I actually got that same thing here in Utah. I went out on my deck Monday morning, and all of a sudden it was 48 degrees, and I cried a little bit. But such is life. So, well, cool. Can everybody hear myself and Christine? Okay, maybe just give us a quick +1 or something in the chat pane. Make sure audio, video, everything's working okay. Looks like Thomas said page. Okay, cool. Looks like audio is good. So, well, great. Christine, really glad we got paired up. In fact, I'll let everybody in on a secret. When I was introed to Christine, the person introing us said, you know, you should definitely have Christine on for a webinar, because you two will definitely geek out on all things customer success. So I'm fired up and ready to geek out. How about you?
I'm in. I'm ready.
All right, well, good. Well, cool. So, I mean, for me, especially thinking about this session, those of you that have been on other sessions with us, you'll know we've had a really wide range of all sorts of guests from the customer success world. I mean, we've had influencers, thought leaders, investors, and I always, get particularly excited when we have somebody who's an operator in the trenches, running, building teams, trying as best they can to deliver value for customers. So, I always get really excited about this, and there's a bunch of interest in today's topic. We've got a bunch of signups. A lot of people are really interested in, learning from your expertise of how you've built so many customer success teams successfully. So we'll jump into that. But one thing, just a couple things before we do, we've got a lot of new folks on the session today that maybe don't know about ClientSuccess, who we are, what our story is, and love to just give you a quick intro. So for those of you that are new to ClientSuccess, we are a customer success growth platform. And so what does that mean? Really what it means is we're going to help with all things related to customer success. We help drive better onboarding, better adoption, better renewals, better growth. Anything that your customer success team needs to provide a really great customer experience, that's the type of thing we help with. We want to help your CS team not only provide a great experience, but then turn around and give those insights, to your leadership team, to your product team, help everybody collaborate on behalf of customers, all in the hope of driving, better retention, better growth. You see here on the slide, we're a leader on G2 in the customer success category. We were the 2020 Cody Award winner for the best customer success solution on the market. We're really excited to win that. So if you either haven't seen us in a while or never seen anything about ClientSuccess, love to show you a little bit more. Find us. We're at clientsuccess.com. You can shoot me a note directly, Mark with a K at ClientSuccess, and look forward to chatting with everyone. So that's me paying the bills. So let's, I'm going to stop the share, and we're going to jump into things with Christine. So as I was saying before, what we're going to do is this is going to be a really open, interactive session. And so Christine's going to share a bunch of advice and insights on, the stuff that she's done to build multiple different CS teams. And as you have questions, as you have thoughts or comments, let's make it a really active chat pane. Looks like we've got a lot of folks that are in the chat pane already. And so I will monitor the chat pane, but I'm going to kind of turn it over to Christine to kind of run and kind of give us some of her thoughts, and then we'll keep it going. So Christine, how about you kick us off?
Sounds good. Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Christine Vienna Knific. lots of names, all that. I am our head of customer success here at Wisr. Wisr is an education technology company that focuses on providing virtual solutions for building community and building interaction between students in a campus community when being there on campus just isn't possible.
You're pretty busy these days.
Yes. We started 4 years ago, and I don't think anybody ever could have predicted quite the need that we have right now.
Sure.
So it's an exciting time. It also means that it's crazy busy.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I came into Wisr pretty recently. As we all know, COVID-19 changed the way educational institutions do things in March. And I was brought into Wisr at the end of March because there was just a significant need. So my background, I've been in customer success almost my entire career. I always like to say that I started in CS organically. It was a very natural thing for me. Much to my
like most of us, you thought about it when you were 5 years old. I want to grow up and be in customer success is what you mean.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm sure like many of you, my mom still can't really articulate what it is that I do.
My secret is, so with my dad, he has on my contact record in his phone, he has me type out what I do. So when people ask him what I do, he just shows them. He just pulls out his phone and shows them. So I probably shouldn't tell them. But anyway.
That's a good solution. I like that. My mom still can't do it. So, but you know, I told Mark I was in dental school at the beginning of it. Right after undergrad, I went into dental school, thought I was going to be a dentist, thought it would be really great. Figured out pretty quickly that I'm not really comfortable with blood and being in the medical profession. So I thought maybe I could go into research or something. Long story short, that wasn't for me. And so I took a break from school, and some friends of mine said, hey, we have this new startup. It was also in education technology. We're starting to see traction. We need some help with our customers. Do you want to do this while you're figuring out what you're going to do? I ended up coming to that company, building the CS team. At its largest point, there were, I believe, 15 on the CS team. And I've been in CS ever since. So it just kind of happened organically for me.
So funny that, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, the startups, it's, you know, a founder turns to somebody who's smart on the team and says, hey, can you just go figure out what to do with our customers? Like that feels like, especially in, 10, 15 years ago, that was the way kind of customer success or whatever the name it had at the time, whether it was account management, whether it was customer experience, whatever, that feels like that's how it starts at a lot of early stage startups.
Oh, totally. I can tell you, so I had been there for almost a year, and one of the co-founders called me and said, hey, I'm really happy with how things are going. My investors say that you need a title. Can you figure out what that should be? And I am very honest when I say I'm Googling, trying to figure out like, what is it that I really do? And CS was where we landed. So.
Right on. Cool. So I guess walk us through there. I mean, from there, maybe to your next business, like how do you get to a point from you build that team, you build it up to 15 employees, doing really cool things. You move on to another company doing it again. Now you're doing it again. Like walk us through kind of the rest of the story.
Yeah. So from there, I went to another company. They were a wearable technology company. So they had a wrist-worn activity monitor. This was, I'm going to date myself, but this was way before anything like the Apple Watch.
Sure.
So we had a wrist-worn activity monitor, and they were on a really, what I would call the traditional sales and support model. They had a sales team that kind of had the customer relationship cradle to grave. They had a support team that was in really sorry shape. And I was brought in they knew they needed customer success. They had no idea what it was. And that was really interesting. I mean, we can talk about that later, I guess, but it was really interesting because they said they wanted customer success. They knew that they needed it, but they didn't really want it. So I spent a lot of time convincing that group from the leadership down that customer success was a good thing. It really should be revenue generating. I promise you we'll take care of your customers and that sort of thing. From there, I've worked with a few different other companies, always in the customer success team, sometimes operational, sometimes leadership. But then kind of fast forward today, I've always been brought into various companies in the early stages of customer success, whether it was starting from the beginning of, we literally have no one and we need some help and we don't know what to do, or it's going from we're pretty established, but we're in this traditional model. So I've always kind of been brought into a problem solve situation, which is where we got to today for Wisr. Wisr had, they were doing well, but suddenly there was such an influx of customers with everything that's been happening. There was a really apparent need for a CS team to exist instantly. So that's where we came today.
So I want to dig in on that point where your second company with the wearables, they said they wanted customer success, but it turns out didn't really want it. Like, what did that actually look like? What are some of the challenging conversations that you ended up having? And maybe for those folks that are on the call that, maybe are looking at joining a new company, what are some questions you perhaps could ask? How could you suss that out beforehand? Because the last thing in the world you want to do is join on a new company as a customer success leader to build customer success. And then it turns out I spend all my time just fighting whether or not people even want to give me any investment. Like how did that look like at that company? And, how would you advise people to think about that now?
Yeah. Well, so I knew going in that it was going to be challenging because of what they were asking me in the interview conversations that we were having. They were very, very much focused on the fact that they had one customer support guy, and his average response time to his ticketing, which is all they could really talk about, which was a huge red flag for me. All they could really talk about was that his ticketing response time was over a week. For his first response, and how they thought it was horrible, and the sales team would just rather handle it themselves. And that was the big battle point, was the head of sales there. He and I are good friends today, but I can tell you, we did not start out that way. He and all of his reps would tell me, no, that is my customer. I will be with them forever. And that was a really big challenge for us because, one, I felt I needed to prove it. Prove that we would do a good job, prove that there's a lot of value and why we should be moving to this model. But also, anytime the one individual at your organization owns the relationship, there's a propensity to lose a customer if that person leaves for any reason. So I think that's really detrimental. So what we did there, I really went into firefighting mode. I think that's kind of where I have some fun, actually. But I published a biweekly metrics report of all of the reactive things that we could do. And then I also started publishing a weekly spotlight of process improvement or customer spotlight or things that we were doing to highlight and educate the rest of the company as to how it would be different. We're proactive, we're not reactive. We're revenue generating, we're not a cost center. All of the things that we know and love to be CS that really in the traditional model they didn't have. And I think that the best day for me at that company came when the head of sales came into my office and he said, you don't have to send us those reports anymore. We believe you. And I was like, okay.
So how many times did you have to send that report though?
Oh, months. It took me months.
So this is months, at least twice a month. So, you're saying this report out, let's say at least a dozen times.
Oh yeah.
If not more. And I think that's one of the things that, that is frustrating for a lot of customer success folks. And sometimes it's a matter of just like, digging in for the long haul and having patience. If you're working with somebody who's never done this before, they're in the sales support mindset, and that's where they've spent their entire career. It's not like you're going to go in and have one internal board meeting and all of a sudden, everything flips around and you're in good shape. You got to be prepared for those. You said something there about, in that report you'd send out, here's the reactive KPIs, and then here's some of the things that we would do. There's a question in the chat pane around kind of KPIs. And so I'm curious, what were some of the KPIs that you would report out on the reactive side? And then if there were KPIs that you would report out on the proactive customer success side, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So the reactives were, I think, Fairly standard. You know, at that company, support and customer success were under me. So of course there was the very, very typical time to first response and waiting and satisfaction for those and all of that sort of thing. I also implemented very, very quickly regular surveying of customers at different points on their journey to make sure that we were really capturing what their experience was.
And what were those points? Is that, you know, right after they buy? Is that like, how'd you think about that?
Yeah, at that point we were doing, I'm trying to think back now because like I said, I'm dating myself. At that point we were doing at the point of sale, so right when they became customers, when onboarding was complete, 30 days out, and there were different types of surveys, right? It was sometimes it was informal and it was part of a conversation that we knew we were surveying, but you know, they didn't. You certainly don't want to be sending somebody an email every 30 days or something like that. But we were doing it right after onboarding, 30 days into live. I believe that we did a 6-month check-in or something like that, but we had a regular cadence that we were recording all of that. And we didn't have something like ClientSuccess or any of the CS platforms back then. We couldn't get budget for it. There was no buy-in, but it was also a long time ago. So I literally
exist at that point. So
what'd you say?
So most of us probably didn't exist at that point.
No, not at all. But I had a big whiteboard in the office with Post-it notes where I would move them for their customer health, depending on where those surveys sat and that sort of thing. So it was we kind of did it what I like to call the analog way. So we would do those. And then other KPIs that we were looking at were expansion. I was adamant that my team at least be part of expansion. Here at Wisr today, we own expansion entirely. I was unable to get that buy-in back then, but so expansion numbers and really proving that, like I said, not only are we serving our customers well and creating and cultivating a great relationship, but we're revenue generating. As soon as I was able to show that and show that we were actually contributing to our goals financially for every quarter, the reporting requests stopped. They were very happy with that.
So that was the turning point. As soon as we see, this team is actually driving, you know, top line revenue for us. I'm going to ask this question. I think you just answered it, but I'm going to ask it to kind of drive the point home. One of the things that I saw, and a lot of us saw, and there's probably a lot of people on the call that were impacted by this, is, you know, as soon as COVID hit, you know, there were a lot of companies that the first thing that they did was they started to cut their customer success team.
Yeah.
And, you know, at the same time, there's been this kind of constant battle in customer success of, should we own revenue? Should we not? Should we own a number? Should we not? And, you know, we've taken a stand here at ClientSuccess that, you know, part of the reason that that's going on is because, or part of the reasons we saw so many, you know, folks in customer success unfortunately lose their roles when cost cutting came, is because they were afraid to step up and own a number, or maybe we're owning a number but not driving it as well as they could, or reporting back on that. You know, it sounds like, based on what you're doing here at Wisr, you guys own expansion. I'm assuming you probably own renewals, kind of all of that. Just in general, what are your thoughts from a practitioner on that argument of whether CS should own revenue or not?
Yeah, I mean, that can be kind of like the age-old CS argument, right? My personal experience, and I've actually done a lot of research on it too. like we said, I geek out on numbers. I like metrics. I like to let data drive it. So in my experience and in my research, customer satisfaction and the overall customer lifetime value of a contract is much, much greater when CS at least partially owns the revenue number. I'm uncomfortable with CS not having any revenue criteria or KPIs because, to your point, I think that that's when you become sort of a line item and easy to remove. So my team at Wisr has expansion, we have renewals, and I saw somebody through the chat, I know Mark's monitoring it, somebody was asking, what about logo churn? What about retention? Yes, of course, right? Those definitely are our core functions for CS, but for me, getting my leadership team to understand in the various points in my career that CS is not only a necessary function, but we're an additive function. us at least owning portions of the revenue generation and revenue retention is critical.
Sure.
So my personal opinion is that the CS team needs to own renewal. NPS surveys actually show that the NPS score is higher when the CS team drives a renewal rather than the sales team. So I'm really adamant that that's where that sits. I can be flexible on how we handle expansion. But.
So Ty just pops a question in just a second ago on this topic of, so you and I are talking about how, CS, should own a number, and we can debate, expansion, renewals, there's different versions of it, but as you said, one of the companies you were at, the switch finally flipped when, you were seen as additive and not a cost center. Ty's question is here, how do you get leadership to see outside just churn and NPS? Customer success is so much more than that. And often the C-suite only sees the numbers. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you see that being an important part of the discussion, or does that kind of go counter to what we were just talking about?
I believe it's an important part of the discussion. I think that when I'm never comfortable with the customer success team being the sole responsibility for NPS or CSAT, because there's so much more that goes into that. I often find that NPS, unless you really specifically word the survey correctly, customers go right to their thoughts about the product, and it has almost nothing to do with the CS team's function. So I always want to tie at least part of our KPIs back into revenue in some respect, because if you don't, it's very easy to get into a purely qualitative stance, and that's too subjective for me.
Got it. Makes sense. So we're getting a bunch of questions on KPIs and things, and I'm going to try to kind of bundle a bunch of these KPI questions into one thing. So you've gone through these other companies. You're now at Wisr, and you guys are early stage. And I want to just kind of get a sense from you of how you think about KPIs at this stage when you're very early on. What are some of the key KPIs you work toward now? And how perhaps does that evolve as you get to 10, 15, 20 people on the customer success team? Do those KPIs adjust, change? How do you think about how do you think about that as the team evolves?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that it's something that, truthfully, I'm still working on it. I like to be very transparent about that. One of the first things, so when I joined the team with Wisr, I had one person who was a dedicated CS function, and the rest I was going to hire in. And what immediately on my very first day, she was very professional, but she was also very young. And she said, "You're my new boss. What are my goals? What are my KPIs?" And I'm thinking to myself, I don't even have a login to Wisr. I have no idea. That's not entirely true, right? I mean, we're CS professionals. We know what we're looking for. So I guess I would say in the early stages, we're looking for retention. We're looking for, and it depends on your subscription model too. Wisr is an annual subscription model. So it's really hard in a 6-month or a 90-day review to tell your team, yeah, you're really killing it with retention, or we've got an issue there, because if it's an annual subscription, it's not a lot of movement. But yes, looking at retention, net retention, I like to look at both retention and net, because I think expansion is extremely important for a CS team to keep their eye on. I like to look at identification of expansion opportunities versus the actual one expansion opportunity. I think that the CS team is doing their job by making that identification, and I guess in my mind should receive some credit even when it doesn't close. So I think that that's important. As we evolve though, and as the team gets more longevity, in my view, the retention dollars get much more important. The total lifetime value of the customer gets much more important. But beyond that, I also like to do a strategic planning exercise with my team every 6 months, where we identify what our focus is for the next 2 quarters, what we're working on in terms of strategic projects. And then I actually lay those out in milestones or shippable items that become that team member's KPIs and what they're driving towards. One of the things that I always struggle with in CS is that we've got a lot of qualitative stuff. So I always try to find value not only in the numbers that we're all talking about, but also in the contributory collaborative projects that they help with.
Gotcha.
So I try to map it out that way.
You also mentioned hiring. We got a bunch of questions on hiring, and the almost like the profiles of hiring that you make as time goes. A few months ago, we had Mark Roberge, formerly of HubSpot, on, and one of the things that he talked about is early on, the type of person that you hire, whether it's into customer success, to sales, to whatever, early on, you tend to want to hire the person who's going to be kind of the process builder. They're going to help identify, here's the things that should be done. So they're actually not coming to you asking you, what are my KPIs? They're actually sitting down, doing the work, and coming up with, here's what the KPIs should be. Now, that's the person that you usually want to bring onto the team early on. Later on, you get to be more process followers or process refiners, whereas, early on, you want the process builders. I'm curious, what are your thoughts there? So the team that you're hiring right now at Wisr, how is that, different than the team you see yourself hiring 24 months from now?
Well, that's interesting. So for me, budget's always a concern. I think it is for everybody. So for me, sometimes being able to bring the people in who would know the CS process and would kind of know the practitioner standpoint, would be able to help me develop those things, I might not be able to afford them. And so when I'm hiring, really for everything that I do with my team, the first thing I'm focusing on is what our core values are as a team and as a company, and what our mission is. I can teach, so I like to drive everything we do with empathy. Part of what Wisr's mission is to make sure that the right prospective students find their next educational step, wherever that institution is. I can teach people to do CS. I like to do it. That's where my wheelhouse is. I can't necessarily teach them to be empathetic and to value what we value. So that's actually, for me, what I'm looking for first and foremost. Secondly, I'm looking for somebody with some professional experience, and that may not be a popular answer. It doesn't have to be CS.
Okay, yes, not necessarily in CS. Could be something else. Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be CS, but I need somebody with professional experience. I don't have time to teach people that you have to reply all to an email when you should, or that you need to, I don't, we're too small. I don't have time for that. Yeah. So I drive everything with our core values and our mission. That's my first standpoint. Then I start to look for industry expertise. So I have somebody on my team who's a former dean of a career and alumni services at a university, because he has tacit knowledge that I could never hope to find in a CS practitioner. But
not customer success knowledge, but knowledge in the industry of your customers.
Exactly. He has something that I don't have. So I'm looking for ways to bring people into my CS organization. I feel that I can teach them CS, but I can't necessarily, if I don't know it, I don't have the experience that he has in the higher education industry. So if I can bring people in who are going to be collaborative in that way, I'm able to build a much more constructive team.
You're definitely not the first person I've heard say, I'm going to test for values, and then the rest of the stuff, the skills I can teach, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Savannah asks, how do you screen for empathy in the interview?
I like to talk to people quite a bit about I like to talk about their college experience, specifically for what we're doing. That's extremely relevant. So I want to know what their college application experience was, if they transferred, what led to their transfer, how they became part of their campus community. Because when they start talking about those things, they can directly tie into our core values and our core mission. So I'm able to pretty easily identify at least how that ties in.
So identifying with the experience your customers are going to have. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing in terms of actually screening for the empathy is I can ask them sometimes, if you were to describe what would make a good, or what should drive us in terms of our values, what would you prescribe? And giving them the ability to do the creative aspect of it really, really helps. Plus, I have to be really honest, I do best in an interviewing situation when I ask the rest of my leadership team to talk to these people and weigh in, because they always have a different empathetic and value read than I do. So
yeah, and I find that also. I mean, especially when I'm hiring someone to be on my team, my default sometimes, and to my detriment, is I tend to go into the day job and I talk about the day job. Here's the stuff that, have you done stuff like this? Give me examples of times you've done things that I'm going to ask you to do. And, just in a 30 or a 60-minute interview, sometimes you don't have time to really dig into some of the more life experience type stuff. And, sometimes people call it more of a culture fit type interview. And I think that's kind of what we're referring to here, is making sure that somebody fits the culture, has the values, has the type of experiences that would really jive with your team, and they know when to hit reply all. Sounds like that's the main thing I'm going to take away. When to use reply all and when not to. And I guess that probably all changes in a world where we're all using Slack, so we'll have to figure that out. So
yeah, no kidding.
So there's a question about specializing. So, you mentioned at your first company, both support and customer success rolled up into you, mainly because, you were new and you were saying, I'm going to own customers, whatever that meant at the time. Now we've kind of evolved into this world where you have all sorts of different customer success specialties. You have onboarding, you have renewals, you have experience, you have, customer success, engineering, obviously that is for different stages of companies, but how do you think about, when is the right time to bring customer success? Well, first, when's the right time to split customer success and support? And then once you get into customer success, how do you think about when or if to specialize roles?
Yeah. So that's something we're doing right now. Today, I do not have a dedicated, which I know that for those of you on the call, this is probably going to be a very sinful thing to say. I don't have a dedicated support function at this point.
Okay.
The reason for it is because when I look at my metrics, I don't have the volume of end user support that would ever warrant a full-time dedicated individual. And so at this point.
So is it safe to say that as soon as the reactive becomes a distraction from being proactive, then it's probably time to specialize those two out?
Absolutely. So for example, I look at on a regular basis, we look at it weekly as a team. We look at weekly what our ticket volume is from a pure technical support standpoint, what the ticket volume is, what the defect volume is, handle time, response time, all of these things. And if they're within the thresholds that we're comfortable with, and the team is still hitting their proactive KPIs, then I have no reason for a dedicated support function. And I've had some team members say to me, gosh, I think it's distracting. And I do too. But until we have something that warrants that, I couldn't possibly. But we're constantly.
I think that's interesting that you say it's within our acceptable thresholds. We know that you're going to be distracted X percent of time, whatever that is, 10, 15, 50%, whatever it is. But, and I think that to me is the key. You've defined out, here's the acceptable range. And until we break that model, we don't see a reason to change it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it can be frustrating for the team.
Let's go beyond that. So let's go, okay, now we get to a team that we have them split out. Now there's the other level of specialty, onboarding or whatever. How do you think about that? Is it the same framework?
Yes. So my next, so I can already tell you, I know what's going to happen at Wisr. We'll end up splitting out our technical support function into one other designated role. I would think that the next thing that we'll do is we'll probably bring in two or designate out two people who are specifically dedicated to onboarding customers. Yeah. And the metrics that we'll be watching for that are the time to live, time to value, as well as how many other accounts they can handle when they're running an implementation, or in some cases, I've got people running 6 or 7 at a time, plus their other portfolio load, which, as we all know, it would be really a time-consuming effort. But I have 16 implementations for 16 different universities going on right now. One dedicated onboarding individual could never do that.
Sure.
So for me, I'm looking at the metrics again. We're looking at those things, but I already know it'll first be technical support based on the numbers that I'm seeing. The next thing to come would be the onboarding.
So how do you think, because I mean, a minute ago, we talked about how when customer success becomes additive on the revenue side, the questions start to go away. Now, I support onboarding. Like these are two roles, especially that I don't know if it makes sense to give them a revenue number. They're giving, their metrics. How do you kind of justify that in light of what we've been talking around, customer success, should own a number. I don't know if those two roles own a number. Obviously they input into it. Like, how do you think about that as you're trying to get approval from your CFO and your leadership team to build these functions up?
Yeah. So for the onboarding, that they're not going to own a number in terms of additive revenue, but they are going to very often, not in everybody's revenue model, but in some, they're very often going to own a number in terms of when the revenue can actually be recognized.
Interesting.
When
Tell
you're
me more about that.
Yeah, when you're looking financially, this was a really big concern at one of my previous roles, especially, are the way that we were structured, both with the tenets of our investment and our loans. We're in startups, we all have those, for the tenets of our investments, and also with the way that our board required us to report. We were required to have the customer considered at least soft launch before we could recognize the revenue on the books. So there was constant pressure to the onboarding and implementation teams, as well as training team, because they were much more specialized. It was much larger, to get those customers live and seeing value as soon as possible so we could recognize that revenue. It's really great if you've got $1 million MRR on the books, but if I can't recognize it because an implementation's taking 180 days, that's a huge problem.
Gotcha.
So the revenue recognition was really, really big there.
And I assume, and I think you said this, but those are you've seen those cases where it's a big implementation. You said it could be 6 months.
Sure.
I think some folks on the call might have a much shorter 30, 60-day implementation. That's probably less of a concern at that point.
Yeah. But that's what we have at Wisr too. So right now we tell our customers that it'll be a 45-day implementation. My team knows that we're going for 30. So that's where we are as well. But with our customers, that's part of their contract. So we would actually be in breach if we violated the 45 days.
So, that makes, I think that answers all those questions. Jay asks a question around kind of the classic staffing question. How many customers can an individual CSM manage? Do you think about it in terms of customer count? Do you think about it in terms of overall revenue? I always kind of hear a classic metric thrown out that a CSM should manage somewhere between $1 to $2 million of annual contract value. Do you buy into that? Do you say, I'm going to build more of a bottoms up model where I'm going to look at, how much workload? Do you try to do a combination? None of the above? How do you think about that?
Yeah. This may not be a popular opinion. I don't believe that the $1 to $2 million revenue mark for a CSM is enough information to go on. Okay. That only really works if your revenue model supports it. If your average contract value is 17,000 ARR, you would have to get to a whole lot of customers before you got to one CSM's threshold of 1.1 or 1.5 or whatever you're going for. Okay. So I don't really buy into that unless you have a really specific average contract size. More, I view it as what we know to be the time-consuming portions of a customer's life cycle. That's how I calculate when my team has capacity. If I know that Anna, one of my CSMs, I know she has 8 implementations she's running right now. She has 3 cycle resets. That's a thing in education specifically for the school year. She has 3 cycle resets, and then she has 4 upcoming renewals. I know how to balance that out because I know what each of those things costs me in terms of time. So I'm more looking at it, as you said, from a bottoms up perspective in terms of what their capacity might be. But also if we have an expansion my words are escaping me. If we have an expansion opportunity that we're really driving after, like we just released a feature that I've set a goal that 75% of our customers need to have it by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a low cost expansion. It should be pretty easy for us to get. But if I'm seeing that Anna's spending so much time on her onboarding and she can't even possibly run after her expansion number, then I know my ratio is off. I believe in a fluid model. I don't believe that you could ever easily say, this is the number.
And I think so. I mean, you brought up that point a minute ago where you said, every 6 months you'll take the team off site and we'll say, what are the key things that we should be thinking about for a metric standpoint? I assume you probably at the same time say, like, what does the team structure need to look like over the next 6-12 months? And that's going to evolve. You brought up, an interesting point on the unit economics of, okay, if Anna's average ACV customer is worth 17 or 20 grand, to get to the $1 million mark or the $1.5 million mark, she might have to manage, 100 customers, and that's just not going to work. So that brings up always the conversation around, call it high touch, call it tech touch, call it low touch, call it all that. And, we spend a decent amount of our time here at ClientSuccess talking to companies, and we'll talk about, what's your customer success engagement model? Are you, do your customer values justify you to, have a CSM who's going to pick up the phone every month and talk to the customer? Or do you have a lower ACV count? And what are those thresholds? How do you think about it? So if you were to take over a new customer success team, and maybe you could kind of talk about how you thought about this or you're thinking about this at Wisr, how do I make the decision around whether I'm going to be much more of a, automated communication, low touch, tech touch model versus more a strategic, high touch model? Do you buy into even that thought process? That's something that we hear quite a bit. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, when we're thinking about kind of the traditional pyramid model where you've got your high touch at the top, your mid touch, and then your tech touch at the bottom, or your volume segment of customers. I've certainly been in roles in the past where I think that that's very applicable. I've had roles where I'm having my CSMs have maybe 1,000 customers each that they handle, and it's purely from a technologically driven standpoint. Sure. That said, I do think it's really industry specific. I can tell you that if I were to put a tech touch model in place for our higher education institutions whose plans right now for reopening are changing by the minute, the tech touch model likely wouldn't support it at this point. So I do think that that's a very important thing to take into account, is the way what your industry can handle and some of the parameters.
If your industry is in upheaval like ed tech is today, it's not really going to work. If your industry is in more of a steady state, maybe that's a different conversation.
Absolutely. It's also, I don't like to think of it, we kind of don't have that bottom segment. We don't have the volume segment that you would consider for tech touch. However, I believe that as long as you do have technology supporting your CS team, I'm a mom, I make mom jokes, dad jokes all the time, but you work smarter, not harder, right? You are making sure that you use your technology to support whatever your team is doing so that you can scale. So for example, I do have information, I have tech supported items that go out from my team on a regular basis. This expansion drive that we're running right now is a great example. They're not having to do much to drive their expansion efforts for that particular item. But we still have that top level of strategics. I will tell you that my Yale and my Brown University and my high elite institutions are not going to be receiving those automated communications.
Yep, that makes sense.
But the other thing that I will say too, in terms of the tech touch, I believe really strongly in creating as much self-service capability as you possibly can. Because if you teach your customers to fish, then you're going to have a much more scalable solution. So we put a lot of effort into that as well.
So let's continue on the tech stack thought process. So, what I typically see from an early stage startup is, as you'd expect, their tech stack is kind of a hodgepodge of different things. They might have a CRM, maybe they don't even have a CRM, and maybe they have some type of they're just starting to understand kind of product usage. maybe they will use their email, their calendar. They might have some type of project management, tool that they use to kind of manage life cycles. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have people that have a sophisticated customer success platform that brings everything that a CSM is going to need and use, and they kind of live out of a customer success platform. Obviously, that's where I live. How do you think about, for a startup, when are kind of the ideal times to think about evolving your tech stack? Let's just start there.
Yeah. So I've said it, I'm a big believer in data-driven approaches to things. So for me, the sooner you invest in something like that and invest the time and invest the capital to make sure that you've got the tools you need, the better off you're going to be. I've done it where I was unable to secure the investment from my leadership team and literally would do it as an analog approach. I would do a health evaluation on a daily basis and I would pull all of these reports. But if you kind of think about customer success maturity.
I can just see all the people nodding on the webinar.
Really?
And they're like, oh man, dude, that's my life. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'll tell you what, I interviewed somebody the other day. I have open positions on my team right now. And I interviewed somebody the other day and she was really proud of the health checks that her team does. She said, oh yeah, we operate fully off of customer health. Okay, great. How do you do it? Well, we are given a monthly report of our customer health and we go off of that Excel spreadsheet. And like, I died a little bit inside because I can't do that. So for me, when you start out really in the early days of customer success, I think of it as kind of like a stair-step approach. Yep. In the very early days, it's like heroic efforts of one or a couple of people. You're doing everything you can to make the customer stay happy. And basically you're doing what you can to stay afloat with those customers. As you start to mature.
Probably classic, that whole doing things that don't scale. That's the epitome of it, is probably at that stage.
100%. They have my cell phone number if they need it. My goodness, please call me if you need something. You're not able to be strategic. You're certainly not able to scale. But as you kind of climb up the stairs in terms of what I think of in the way of a maturity model, as you mature the processes that your team is following, so the way that we onboard, the way that we move people along the customer journey, and as you mature the technology that you're using, meaning transparent and available data to all, making it the reporting real time instead of scheduled or real time instead of on demand. As you mature the technology and the processes that you work with your CS team on, your team gets more and more able to get to that agile, repeatable, scalable experience that we're all at when we want to scale. So for me, the sooner you start to mature your tech stack, the faster you're going to be able to get to that point. So I have actually argued in favor of getting technology. I'll take it over another person because I think it's going to be that valuable. Okay,
cool. Savannah asked a question kind of going back when you were talking about trying to give people as much material as they can on their own. So, her question was, what kind of self-help materials do you recommend you develop? Is that your knowledge base? Is that investing in in-app walkthroughs? Is that, something else? How do you think about that? Because that's also, a kind of a tech stack question of like, what are the pieces of our enablement tech stack do we invest in? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So I like to look at it as a very holistic approach. Everything, the customer's at the center of everything, and as many inputs, capabilities you give them, the better it's going to go. So for me, it's the knowledge base. We definitely own that because we're the closest to the customer with the language. We work with our marketing team to make sure it's in brand voice, but we definitely own the knowledge base. I like to develop a customer community where they can interact with their peers, network, that sort of thing. We definitely do webinar series just like you all to talk about industry expertise and critical events and things like that. We're really, really big on showing instead of telling. So our knowledge base has a lot of videos. We also have beacons that are put into the product that have contextual help. So anywhere the user is within the product, the applicable
we have this piece of our app, this is something that people need help with. Here's a little bit of, blurb on how to use that piece.
Yep. And right now, anyway, my team owns all of those channels.
I'm proud of your team.
Yeah.
Your business.
It's a lot. I would love to maybe have a dedicated function in marketing that would just specifically do those things, but we're just not there in terms of budget today. So
Sure.
we also do customer communications. We're working with our marketing team really tightly to do that. And then we also have, which this is new for me, but I really like it. We have a separate repository of what we call our strategy articles for our customers. And it's a database of all of the things that we know to be the best practices for our customers that we wouldn't necessarily just want on the knowledge base, but it's more like, this is how you might design your program when they're looking to us for consultative help rather than just technical things.
Sure.
That's the repository that my CS team pulls from when it's relevant so that they can provide things to their customers when they need them versus they're just being something right there. It allows us to provide expertise on an additional level.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. So let's see other questions. We're coming up on time. We got a few minutes left, and I'm going to try to get to as many of these questions. And if we don't get to your question, I apologize. Maybe I'll try to figure out a way to follow up afterwards. Danielle asks the age-old kind of comp question. So how do you think about, how do you incentivize your team? Do you pay commissions? Do you pay, bonuses based on retention? Like, how do you think about the overall comp of your team, and how perhaps does that evolve over time?
Yeah. So we have, I would say, a blended model. We have their base pay. We also have what their eligibility is in terms of bonus and their commission. Okay. So they have, we have their base pay, and I do that, based on the comparables, and I work really closely with our HR team to make sure that those are, relevant for the industry. Then on top of that, they have a bonus structure where they could specifically be earning towards those qualitative KPIs and those qualitative objectives that we talked about in our strategic planning. So for example, if this was at a previous company, you mentioned G2. If it's somebody on your team's specific objective to make sure that we have customer advocacy, I may not be able to say, you have to give me, you have to give me 50 G2 reviews this year. I don't recommend that as your KPI, but you could. You could, however, say, you need to increase our visibility in the advocacy sites, the crowdsourcing sites. And then from more of a qualitative perspective, you can say, met goal, did not meet goal, exceeded goal. And those things are what would then go into that bonus portion. So you've got your base pay, the bonus portion, and then we do have a straight commission structure available on getting referrals for expansion opportunities, as well as the actual expansion modules that we can sell into. So like we just released a single sign-on module. They can receive small, but a commission on that as well.
Got it. So something I've heard the term thrown around, a customer success qualified lead, something like that, yes. Where I give a lead and maybe that lead actually ends up being signed by somebody else, but I identify the opportunity, I effectively qualify the opportunity. And then, if my structure means somebody else needs to be the, maybe demo or kind of do something else there, sounds like that's what you got. Yep. Let's see here. Few last questions. Danielle just put this question in. Do you have any guidelines for your team on the amount of proactive communication for their clients per month, quarter, annually? And is that based on the revenue that client brings in? For instance, maybe do your enterprise clients get a bunch more communication than your SMB clients? Back, I think, a little bit to kind of our question around, engagement models, but anything else you'd add there?
Yeah, in terms of touch frequency, I do have a touch requirement for our customers, and it varies between enterprise level, or who I consider our strategic partners, versus the rest of the bulk of our customer base. I have it set up in our CS system such that their health is affected if they have not had a touch point with us in recent time, and the time frame changes. Sure. So our CS team is able to drive off of that. Most of the time, they're already having conversations with them, and what I'm finding is that almost never hits. But it is a reminder for them that we need to have a last touch point with them in so many days or weeks. However, I don't believe in calling just for the point of calling. So I don't like the model of, hey, it's time for us to talk again this week. It doesn't really, it makes you transactional with your customers. So what my team does instead is we do an account planning exercise where for your accounts, you must have a plan that it goes 3 to 6 months out for every account that you have. When you have that, you have those proactive touch points or tasks for yourself planned out way in advance. So there's no need to be thinking of reasons to talk to the customer because you're always trying to advance them to that next point on the journey. I'm trying to get them to achieve this next objective that they've talked about, and this is how we're going to get there. So we go more at an outcome-based approach rather than a frequency approach.
I'm glad you brought that up. So I manage our sales team here at ClientSuccess, and I was just having the conversation 2 days ago around, when we're talking about bringing on a new customer to ClientSuccess, I don't necessarily want to show you my entire platform.
Right.
What I want to show you is the solution to today's problem and the solutions to a couple problems that are coming just down the road that you perhaps don't even know about yet. Because oftentimes what I see sales reps make the mistake of is they go in, they show off all my cool 28 features, and then you get to the end of the demonstration and the prospect says, ooh, that was a lot. I need to go back and think about this because I have nowhere near the bandwidth to go do all the cool stuff you just showed me, even as cool as it is. So like what I think you're talking about dovetails nicely into that. And so the entire customer journey should be this constant stretch of let's just get you to the next step. In the sales process, it should be, let's get what you need right now, plus 2 or 3 steps out. Then your onboarding team does that. And then your customer success team should come in. And I love the idea of having that plan 60 to 90 or 6 months out to say, here's the next steps, and just constantly trying to evolve, whether that's new things that your customer needs, that, parts of your product that they haven't implemented yet. And if you're in most SaaS companies, you got new features, new things that are coming out. So you're hopefully continuing to add and continue to add value there. Thoughts on there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. When we're looking at the account planning, I'm always trying to get my team back to looking at what the customer's definition of success is going to be. So if the customer's overall goal and mission through using our product and overall goal and mission in general is to run a successful college orientation, which is what a lot of ours are at right now. What would make an orientation successful? What if it wasn't online? What does that mean for you? Because what my team tends to do is they tend to say, well, I really want them to use this feature, but they may not necessarily be able to articulate why. And so what I require us to do is to roll up, well, why do you want them to use that feature? How's it going to help them reach that outcome that they're going for? Because if you can tie it to that, again, you're no longer a line item on somebody's budget, you're a strategic partner. So we always drive it towards that. And so they always have their next steps in mind for that reason.
Awesome. So we're coming right up on time. I tried as best I could to get to most of the questions. There's still some that we're missing. Maybe I'll try to put together a blog post or something as a follow-up to try to answer some of the questions. But Christine, this has been awesome. Super informative. I've learned a ton. Any final words of advice, calls to action, anything that you want to share with folks before we wrap up?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, if you ever have any questions, I think some of you already have connected with me on LinkedIn. I love to connect. I love to talk about this sort of thing. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super happy to have you. And again, really appreciate you taking the time. And I got a couple questions about the recording. Yes, I'll post the recording to our site, clientsuccess.com/webinars. I'll put that up there hopefully this afternoon, might take me till tomorrow. And then I'll also send out the recording to everybody that registered. But really appreciate, Christine, you taking the time, and we will end it there and let everybody get on with their day. So thanks, everybody.